Streaming and all right, we are live. We're back here for part two of Agony of Eros by oh dear, what's that? By Byung-Chul Han. All right, so take it away, Jeff.
Okay.
What did we learn
So in
last
the
time,
first,
real quick, actually, as a recap?
okay, yeah. So in the first session, we discovered his purpose in the book is to outline the problems in the modern world with love, and in particular, erotic love. How it's under threat and it's being killed off. There's very little of it in the world today. What it's being replaced with, and yeah, he's going to go in through all the various different facets of the threats to love in the modern world. In the first case, we talked about how it affects the individual as an individual, the sensations that we feel, the notion of true love, and how it can actually change what mental blocks to the point where what was impossibly to conceive is easily done when somebody is in true love, and why this is also dangerous for society. Now, today, possibly, we're going in chapter 2, we're going to be looking at it more from a sociological perspective, and how it is that capitalism and society are ruining love, and capitalism in particular, or the neoliberal world order that we live in. And that's where we're starting off today. So I guess a few more things about the first part, because he uses a few of the same concepts. So he mentioned the inferno of the same, being the sense that everything is very, very similar or almost the same. It happens more and more because we are narcissistic. We're narcissistic because that's what we're taught to look for. It's very easy for capitalism to fulfill our needs if they're all the same. The idea of mass customization is not as profitable as just mass production. And so if we can mass produce things that everybody sees as familiar because we're all the same kind of narcissist, it's just better for the capitalist system. And the important thing that he saw was, from an individual's perspective, but it also applies sociologically, the root cause of the threats to love in the modern world is the disappearance of the other, the erosion and disappearance of the other. The other person is unknowable. If you think you know the other person, you're fooling yourself and you've destroyed their otherness. If you think you will always be in a sense surprised, and if you don't think you're going to be surprised by them, you've essentially turned them into a self-reflection of who you are, not what they are, and therefore destroyed their otherness. And he says that's the thing you got to stop doing. Okay, you can't just assume that you know somebody. That's in the very simplest terms. But it also means that you must eliminate that power relationship where you say this person is mine or this person is like this, and think that you really know them. It's not true. You're creating a fantasy and you're imposing it on somebody, and in so doing, you're actually destroying the other and turning them into essentially a consumable object. So this chapter is called Being Able Not to Be Able. So we're talking now about external aggravating forces that are killing the erotic or love in our life. And I should also point out, he uses the term erotic and love and infatuation almost interchangeably, because for most postmodernists, what we're talking about is the real sensations in our body. Chemical imbalances that direct us to obsessive actions towards somebody. This kind of stuff, it's felt in the body, and it's not different depending on what kind of love it is. So out of I guess embarrassment or philosophical purity or something like that, we've divided love into 4 branches, like erotic love, agape love, filial love, that kind of stuff, and brotherly love, that kind of stuff. He says, no, that's all nonsense, because the body is still the same. It's varying degrees of intensity of love that's important, and insofar we're losing that intensity, and it's becoming like a flat line, essentially. And that is his problem with the modern world. Now, so Han, in this chapter, begins by introducing us to the notion of achievement society. It's the latest manifestation of power and control over people. He's comparing this with a disciplinary society from Michel Foucault, who believed that capitalism emerged in a disciplinary society because it allowed for greater social control at a lower cost and therefore increased production. He believes that we've moved from a disciplinary society where there is thou shalt, you must do this because we tell you to do it, to what he calls an achievement society. It's one in which people are obsessed with achievement in general, such as doing, experiencing, and achieving. Okay, so for example, people today are obsessed with doing one's work or one's exercise or one's sport or one's study as competitively as possible. We want to get the best marks, and schools are, in a sense, catering to that because everybody's marks are getting better. Doesn't mean that they're actually getting better, but it's the credentials that we're in a sense after, because that shows that we've achieved something. It's also experiencing as vast a set of experiences as possible. So the notion of a bucket list is a relatively modern thing. I think it's like only about 20 years old or so. And so we're searching for achieving the high, and also we're trying to achieve the highest honors, the highest credentials, the recognition, as much recognition as possible. And so he looks at this and says, where in the past disciplinary society was sort of, you could look at it as you should do this. Our achievement society is based on the modial verb can. So we can do pretty much anything we set our minds to. And that's a common, trope that you tell kids, you can do anything that you set your mind to. And what it does, after a certain point, because should reaches a productivity limit, can replaces that, and capitalism becomes even more productive. So people are society encourages us to be better all the time, to improve ourselves. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when taken to an extreme, it is. That's his fear. We have gone way unbalanced. I mean, there's always a good thing about being, continually improving and just doing better in general, learning from your past and that kind of stuff. But when it becomes an obsession, that is problematic for him. So to increase productivity, we can should is replaced by can, and the call for motivation, initiative, and project exploits, like self-motivation exploits us much more than, say, whips and commands do. And so for Han, capitalism, in its quest to improve productivity and efficiency, stumbled. I mean, this was not planned. It stumbled on its way to get people to work harder on productivity by turning internally to self-motivate them, to get them to self-exploit rather than to directly exploit them from the outside. The exploitation is still happening, but it doesn't appear to be coming from a boss as much as it is from oneself. And because it's coming from oneself, it's viewed as freedom. So what he's saying is that in our new achievement society, exploitation and freedom become synonymous.
So this to me sounds a bit like the new version of Max Weber's Protestant ethic.
Ethics and the
spirit
of capitalism.
A similar deal where before it was useful to have, the religion telling people to work hard and hard work is the way to get into heaven or whatever, or towards salvation. But in a society where capitalism is kind of decayed to the point where it's not really growing prospects for the middle and lower classes anymore, then the competition kind of or anxiety kicks in to the point where you feel like you have to be perfect and compete in an extreme way. So that's why this hustle culture kind of gets
yes. So in that sense, it's an outgrowth of his thing. So if I remember from my reading that, it was a long time ago, he believed that Protestant countries were more productive than Catholic countries, and he felt that it was the Protestant religion. And part of that was that for Catholics to get into heaven, you just follow the sacraments, just go to church and you're fine. But for Protestants, they didn't have that. They had the notion that God preordained or chose you, and that good, it was God's grace, but it was all entirely at God's disposal. But if He blessed you, it would appear in your earthly station, and so success was considered evidence of salvation. And if you weren't ever sure, that was supposed to reduce the anxiety. So Protestant countries tended to work harder because they were anxious to show that they were getting to heaven. Foucault, back in the 80s, pushed that a little further, suggesting the notion of the disciplinary society, where instead of using anxiety or slavery, that if you discipline people, you train them to be both docile and productive, and you motivate them, say, with money or with paychecks or with titles, you can increase the productivity. And it was true. He's taking that a step further and saying, now instead of motivating people from the outside, you get them to motivate themselves from the inside. So it could be, in a sense, that anxiety, you're trying to fulfill that anxiety. Anxiety creates that, is one tool to create that. But as we'll see, there's others.
Yeah, sure, but
to generate
it's still
that
got to stem. It stems from the material conditions of capitalism, right? Like the world has to be a place where, long-term stable jobs, where and welfare is eroding, and those stable jobs are disappearing, where there is enough economic anxiety for that to make sense in the first place.
Yes, and also the disciplinary society has to have reached its peak. I mean, it would make no sense to do this back in the turn of the last century, like the 1900s,
sure.
Because we were still disciplining people to be more productive, to be more docile is his word, to be docile and productive. And soldiers are apparently, according to Foucault, the prototype for this, because they do what they're told and they do it very well. And the better they do it, the better they win the wars, but they must also be willing to sacrifice their lives, right? So if we're willing to sacrifice your life and you're willing to put 40 years of your life into a factory position, that's the next best thing. And now, if you're willing to commit your entire life to self-improvement to the point where you are exploiting yourself and becoming more and more productive at every step of the way, but they don't have to pay for it, they don't have to force you to do this, you're doing it on your own, so much better for them, for the owners of the capital, right? And so that's his thesis in this chapter, is that the achievement society is doing what whips and chains and external motivation could not do, by turning it internal motivation, and it's far exceeding the best hopes and dreams of the previous societies. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
All right, so the big concern for him, the big consequence of this is that freedom has turned itself into exploitation in and of itself, and people have not recognized it as such, because we're talking about freedom. I can do whatever I want. I can self-exploit all I want. Anyway, so Han calls an individual who has accepted this new achievement society wholeheartedly as an entrepreneur of the self. It doesn't sound so bad, but again, it's only when it's taken to extremes, as it is in our world today. Or he also calls him an achievement subject. Such a person is not directly controlled by a dominating or exploiting boss, although he may have a boss, but they are not really free either, because they have chosen self-exploitation. And as such, a person is a perpetrator and a victim in one, thereby hiding the perpetrator, because freedom is viewed as a great good. It's in it's in the American Constitution, at least, even if it is a means to an end. So there's a confusion. So freedom, ideally, is the means to a good life. You want to be free to pursue the good life, but in the pursuit of the good life, you may be distracted. And that's what they're doing to us now by, we're about to see. So anyway, so because it appears as freedom, self-generated compulsion is not recognized as compulsion. And so what do we do? What are people doing? People who've accepted this wholeheartedly are actually proselytizing the rest of us through the system. of internal and external competition for bragging rights. So UCAN produces a massive compulsion on which every achievement subject, or the entrepreneur of the self, they dash themselves on these rocks and eventually they shatter. And it's like you do need rest, right? You need in a sense a balanced life to succeed as well, but you need to be in a sense motivated. What they're suggesting and what he sees as happening is that all of these entrepreneurs of the self, I shouldn't say all, a great many of these are suffering under burnout and depression. These are the signs that you're pushing it far too far. So it's okay to be an entrepreneur of the self, but the second you've gone to burnout or to depression, you've gone way too far. And that is not something that's understood by many people. That's why this entire world seems to be unbalanced to him, and why depression seems to be an epidemic worldwide that probably didn't exist in the same modern sense, and even in the recent past. I mean, people were always depressed, but it's a different kind of depression, and it comes from this achievement society where we should all have a nice car, a nice place, travel to the Caribbean in the summer and the wintertime, and be able to spend the afternoons golfing in the day. If you can't live up to that, well, you just haven't tried hard enough and it's your fault. That causes a type of modern anxiety or a modern depression, and we feel we have to work harder to get that, and that burns us out. That is unique to our age. Burnout and depression are not unique, but the way it is unique to our age is a factor, or is caused by this notion of the entrepreneur of the self, or the achievement society, being embraced wholeheartedly. So neoliberalism embraces this new achievement society wholeheartedly because it increases production and hides the power relation. The neoliberal, and this is a quote from the book, the neoliberal regime conceals its compulsive structure behind the seeming freedom of the single individual who no longer understands him or herself as a subjected subject, but as a project in the process of realizing itself. That is, and that's the ruse. Now, whoever fails is at fault and personally bears the guilt. No one else can be made responsible for the failure, nor is there any possibility for pardon, for relief, or for atonement. And this is one of the reasons he doesn't think that capitalism, it's been often described as a religion with a whole bunch of things that are similar. Here, it doesn't. With almost all traditional religions, there's a way to atone, there's a way to achieve forgiveness and relief and pardon, not in capitalism. And if it appears that there is, nah, it's not really there. But do you see the shift here? So in the past, it may have been a failure of command or the teacher to not teach the kid. Now it's a problem with you. You haven't worked hard enough. And that is where the self-exploitation comes in. If it's your fault,
blaming the victim,
you are to blame. Yes, essentially, you haven't exploited yourself enough, and you failed to self-exploit. Or sorry, even if you tried to and failed, it's because you're just not tough enough. You can't handle the depression. You can't handle the tension.
Well,
and
you
probably
didn't
none
make
of it
the
worked.
right decisions too. You weren't. You didn't put in the hard work, do the research, make the right decisions. It's your fault.
Exactly.
Nothing wrong with the society or the system. Nothing there. That's all perfect. Perfectly meritocratic. It's you.
Yes, precisely. You just didn't deserve it. You didn't make the cut. Sorry. Next.
Very Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, he wouldn't say it quite in those terms, I'm sure. So anyway, so that's part of the problem in the world today. Now, neoliberalism's achievement society is very damaging to people psychologically and physically. The individual is induced into Herculean efforts of self-mortification in the pursuit of achievement and bears the full weight of failure without the possibility of relief or forgiveness. So here he points out the difference between capitalism and religion. Capitalism only works with debt and default. Okay? Since it doesn't offer any possibility for atonement, which would free the debtor from liability. Now, we do have bankruptcy protection and stuff, but we're always losing more and more of that. So it's like fighting against that at every step of the way, whereas religion actually wants to keep that kind of stuff because it wants to keep you there, right? It wants you to be a loyal subject. Here, they're burning us out. And that's one of the contradictions of modern capitalism, is that it's killing us, literally. So the impossibility of mitigation and atonement also account for the achievements subjects or the entrepreneur themselves depression. So together with burnout, depression represents an unredeemable failure of ability. That is, it amounts to psychic insolvency. That's his term. Psychic insolvency. You just can't keep up with the demands upon you. And that's the interesting thing. The more you demand of yourself, the harder it gets. And eventually you dash yourself because you seem to have your choice to be able to be as free as you want. Now, here's where he gets to love. Now, here's where he makes the connection to love. It is a lack of relationship with the other that makes lenders think that they should not offer bankruptcy protection. So if you recall from the first session, it's that connection to the other that is the erotic. It's that connection to the other that allows for love to happen. But if you reduce that connection to nothing or to a contract, then you follow the contract, right? It's not love in the traditional sense or any sense of the word. It's consumption. You're consuming this person for your own personal gain. And
sounds
so
like he's talking, sounds like he's basically talking about alienation, but like a less materialist version of it.
Yes, at one point I think he talked about how we're not in factories anymore, and so we experience alienation in a very different sense. But at this point, he's just talking about depression and burnout, psychic insolvency. I guess, yeah, there probably is a connection. I think he's talking about something slightly different, like it's nuance at this point. But it's a lack of relationship with the other that's the problem here with business. So the notion that, people say, oh, it's just business, don't take it personally, that's just before they're about to do something really rude and mean and nasty to somebody. It's just business. Sorry, we have to let you go. Like, just business, right? It's just business is the logic and the sentiment of a lack of connection to another. You don't do that to people you love. You don't do that to your significant other. Burnout and depression are symptoms of pushing oneself too far, and that's where he wants to go with that.
But okay, so is he suggesting then that there is another way we can be doing business under capitalism?
So we are very unbalanced. So I'm not convinced that he wants to destroy capitalism. I mean, there's really good things in it. The highest level of production. We've just gone too far. The elimination of a lot of, exploitative relations.
Sounds very postmodern.
Yes, but there are problems with it, and most of those problems go because we take it to an extreme. So he wants to rebalance us, first of all, by teaching us where we've become unbalanced. Most of us don't see it. We see, we got more freedom, that's great. It's not really freedom if you're self-exploiting, and once you do that, you're kind of hurting yourself. So it's like, you're free to kill yourself slowly. But if you don't realize that, you feel something else must be wrong. You can't put it on. You can't figure out what it is, but society tells you it's your fault because you're not producing enough. So what he wants, in a sense, is a little bit more love out there, more Eros. Okay, so Eros for him is a relationship to the other, situated beyond achievement, beyond performance and ability. And this is why the chapter is called Being Able Not to Be Able. That represents the other's counterpart. So remember, in the first chapter when we talked about the other as being something you cannot understand, you can never know, the same is true with regards to achievement, performance, and ability. You can never achieve or perform or have an ability to understand or know or do for this subject. You can try, and there's nothing wrong with trying, but when you think that you're able to, then you've already destroyed the other. And that's what he says you must not do if you want to actually love. Okay? So the negativity of otherness, that is the atopia of the other. Okay, atopia was another term that he talked about last time. It's like the inhospitable place that you can never actually live in. The other is like that. You got to understand, you got to think of it as that. You can't make it yours. can't make the other person yours. Once you do that, you're destroying their otherness. It's like the pristine beauty of nature. You put a house on it, then you sort of destroyed the pristine beauty of nature. And that's why he's got this atopic other, this notion that you got to maintain their otherness. And if you don't, you're being narcissistic. You're imposing your self on the other person and only seeing the reflection of yourself, in which case they've become a consumption item. So yeah, the atopic other, that is the atopic other, which eludes all ability. It's, sorry, I missed something here. The negativity of otherness. And again, negativity for him is what's missing in our world. Normally we think of negativity as a bad thing, but he sees a lack of negativity as the bad thing. And we live in a very positive world where positivity in all senses of the term dominate everything. We want to add more and more. That's positively adding kind of stuff.
Right.
We want more and more information. And I think we had this discussion last time. If you kiss somebody with your eyes open, you're kind of missing part of the sensation, right? Sometimes you want to limit the positivity in order to better experience what's going on. And that's in our world where we're massively unbalanced in the direction of positivity. We need a little bit more negativity in our world, a little bit less ability, a little bit less performance, a little bit less achievement,
So
in order to see and let the other exist.
So he's relating this positivity, this false positivity, to capitalism? Would he argue that, like, you know, not everywhere in the world is as deeply or intensely integrated into the capitalist mode of production, or nearly, or as advanced? So would he argue that this differs by degrees, depending on where it is or when it is?
Yes, I believe he would. Yes. So achievement society is most powerful in Europe and America and the Americas.
Right. So yeah, the positivity here, we probably seem like complete weirdos to somebody living in rural
Papua New
Nicaragua.
Guinea. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. That's right. We like a really warped sense of values from their perspective. So again, so the relationship to the other, if you want to keep that relationship to the other, it eludes ability. You don't have the ability to know the other, to serve the other, or to be the other, or anything like that, or to perform, or any sort of achievement. But the thinking that you do defeats the other, and that's what capitalism wants you to think. So a successful relationship with the other finds expression in a kind of failure to completely understand. You try. That's where the love actions are, in the attempts, in the trying, in the development, in the sense of really and authentically willing to change for the other, but not being forced, and keeping a firm boundary between you and the other, so that you can see the difference, as opposed to, say, an amorphous kind of spreading out and being everywhere, so that you can only recognize yourself. So that's the kind of failure he's talking about. You can't break that boundary. So absolutizing ability, this is a term he brings up, has the sense of power over something. Positivizing also means being able to add to it or to control it. Anything we say about the other is positivizing it. We're positing something. And there's a connection between the roots of those words, positivity, positing something. And with our power, and in so doing, the other disappears. The other is what we cannot, again, talk about. So talking about knowing or having or possessing the other is speaking in terms of power over the other, but that is technically impossible. What is happening is a deforming of the other into what we think or what we desire, and in so doing, we destroy that atopic other and the possibility of love, because love then becomes a type of consumption. So here's a quote from his book. Today, love is being positivized into sexuality. Okay? What we desire is more sexual than love, because love, again, is something you don't know, you can't understand, you can't really have. But sexuality, oh, you can have that. You can know all about that. You know all the techniques, you know what to do and all that kind of stuff. That's love is being positivized into sexuality, as if you could learn that kind of stuff. And by the same token, it's subjected to a command to perform. Sex today means achievement and performance. And sexiness represents a certain amount of capital that needs to be increased. The body, with its display value, has become a commodity.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the display value of the body here, right? And at the same time, the other is being sexualized into an object for procuring arousal. That's where sexuality and the Eros is going in our world. But that's not love. I mean, that may be portions of come with love, but if that's all you're heading to, you're missing out on the real intimacy in a sense, and real exciting intimacy, because if it's only a reflection of yourself, I mean, that's comfortable. But part of what love is, as he said in the first one, is it's cataclysmic. It's life-changing because it's so different. That's what we're missing, and that's what all of this that we've just been talking about is turning it into. So everybody can see the same porn, or everybody can get the same pills, or everybody can look the same, but they get the same dimensions, they get the same, all that kind of stuff, because there's an ideal of beauty that's presented as perfect, and we need to get as close to that. That's achievement going the wrong way. That's missing the point of love, of the otherness, of like, when there's so many people that are trying to look beautiful in a particular way, say the neoliberal way, everyone becomes interchangeable. How can you love somebody that's, interchangeable with anybody else? It's the uniqueness of any and every individual, but the one that you want to spend the time to get to know. And I say get to know, but I mean, like, try and get to know, but never really be successful, because it's a mystery that will continue forever, and for your entire lives together, because, I mean, people also change. That's where love lies. That's where the cataclysm is. That's where the mystery of it is. And that's what's missing in our lives, and what's being systematically taken out and replaced with all what we see today, the sexualization of everything. So the other is being sexualized into an object for procuring arousal. What this means is that when otherness is stripped from the other, one cannot love. One can only consume. So when I was saying earlier, it's just consumption. It's because all we see is ourselves. We don't see something else that is not us. So when we look at a plate of food, for example, we think that's going to go inside me and I'm going to be satisfied. That's certainly a part of sex and all that, but if that's all you're looking at, you're missing the best part. The best part has got to do with the intimacy, with the mystery, with the unknowability about it, with the the strength that it gives you in your weakness and inability to perform. And what I mean by that is you can never know them. You can never satisfy them. You can never be fully there, which is like the romantic notion that we could. And that is part of what's destroying love. And so how do we get this? How do we make ourselves attractive to other people? We have to fit this image that's given to us. That's a power that changes a person away from their otherness and tries to make them all the same. And so people become engulfed in this inferno of the same. They become interchangeable. It doesn't matter who it is. Just go with this one. That he sees as the destruction of true love. And the society is engineering this
right
for
so
the sake of
like,
better production.
Yeah, it's not us necessarily in our ideas. It's what society and capitalism has engineered through the relations to production and to each other, that it is alienated.
And I want to say that I don't think he thinks, I shouldn't have used the word engineer. He thinks that capitalism may have stumbled upon this in fits and starts, and it just sort of works, and so it's used. He doesn't think there's like a real engineer who like figured it out and moved the world in that direction.
Okay. Is he then saying that, like, let's say the USSR had have not collapsed and was still around, the same as it was in the 60s and 70s? Is he suggesting that society might also be able to, not be able to, but that society in isolation might also develop into this kind of loveless, competitive, othering system as well?
Yes, I think so, because achievement society is not. It's not. I don't think it's unique to capitalism. It just happens to be as an accident of history in the world today because there's only the capitalist world. Um, I suspect it might have been harder there, although I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I've seen pictures of like generals with like thousands of medals and these decorations, far more than we ever seem to give in our military. Um, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
grasping at straws here. I suspect that it could happen anywhere. It just happens here in capitalism because and yeah, that would actually go because he did say like capitalism stumbled onto this as a solution when it was reaching its peak of the disciplinary society. And the disciplinary society was definitely, Foucault was talking about the Russians doing this too. I mean, even that's pretty worldwide. It's independent of the socio-political.
right. Well, I mean, they never really got out of the kind of yeah, labor mindset, or the control mindset. I mean, they were basically ended up being state capitalists anyway. They were just using labor and democracy in a different way.
Yeah. Well, yeah. As soon as they became democratic, they collapsed, right?
Well,
You remember Mikhail Gorbachev?
they were
Mikhail Gorbachev
democratic
was
at
the
the
first
beginning, but
elected
they had a
president.
civil war to deal with. So
Well, Mikhail Gorbachev was the first elected leader of the Soviet Union, and then Boris Yeltsin sort of said Russia wants to pull out of the Soviet Union.
yeah, well, that's
Like, I
a
mean, he
whole
had
other
been elected
topic.
for 1 year, right?
That's a whole other
Yeah,
topic.
that's a whole other topic. All right, let's go. Okay. So again, so so when you take the other away, that's no longer a person anymore. They're not a unique individual anymore. They've become fragment. They're fragmented into essentially sexual part objects. And this is what he sees as happening. People are, picking and choosing who they like um, based on how close they come to an ideal standard of beauty. And that's, well, first of all, the ideal standard of beauty should be whoever you're looking at, okay, or whoever you're with, or you've chosen to be with. That's I believe from his perspective, that would be trying to preserve the otherness in the other. And then nobody else compares. And that's a much safer, meaningful, and long-lasting, I think, commitment. Anyway, another concept that he points out is primal distance. It is a strict border established between one's self-love and the other. Now remember, self-love is good. We need more of it. What we have way too much of is love of self-image. This is where narcissism comes in. And what capitalism wants to do is it wants to create as many narcissists as possible that are all the same, in the inferno of the same, because it's easier to satisfy their needs, cheaper to satisfy their needs that way. But if you keep a strict separation between yourself and the other, it's not a question of like sharing, not sharing. It's like recognizing that they are other and they are not you. So you don't try and find yourself in them, that kind of stuff. That preserving of the other allows for the preservation of love, or the allowing of love to actually blossom. It also is what keeps the other as an end to themselves. So what capitalism is making by having many interchangeable people is that they become the means to an end, the means to arousal, the means to your personal happiness. But what he's saying is the other person should never be a means to your happiness or your ends. I mean, if you're complementary, that's wonderful, that's great. But they must remain an end in themselves, not a tool.
Well,
Once
hold
you
on
turn them
here.
into a tool, which is what capitalism does, yeah.
Sure, capitalism does that, but you could argue that every society ever has. I mean, your partner has been a tool in some way, even in primitive communal societies, because the person you marry is the person that's going to help you take care of that kid and provide the food.
Okay.
Um,
So yes. So in that sense, I didn't mean it in that sense. They meant it in the sense of a tool for your personal gratification. So a helpmate is not a tool. They are a partner. A partner that is different and other than you and is a end in themselves, has all the rights that that an separate individual should have, is the ideal. So in that sense, I used the word tool wrong. But in our world, what he's seeing is that we are pairing up more often than not for our own personal fulfillment. And when that happens, and the other person fails to make you happy, you start to sulk, you start to get depressed, you start to fight and argue. But what he's saying is that you've already destroyed love, because it's not. Just be clear. Just because you love someone doesn't mean you can't fight, but it does mean that you don't sulk. Sulk is like the feeling that this other person has not lived up to your expectations. Now that's okay with you and kids and with bosses and employees and with teachers and students, but not with your significant other. With your significant other, she is an end in herself, and as such, you will always fail to live up to all what you can do for her, and probably vice versa. So that expectation that she will fulfill you means that she's not your tool, she's another independent person. But the second you start to think of her as a tool for your benefit, solely that, then you've essentially destroyed her otherness and made her a consumable object. And in the
Well, then it sounds to me like what he should be advocating for is socialism, because only under superabundance in a society where humans are free from want and from scarcity, can they be self-actualized and emancipated to kind of do whatever they want and actually see the other instead of having this need to find themselves in others. And you could easily, I think, tie that to capitalism and class society in general.
Yes, you probably could, but I think you would suggest that it's possible to do that within capitalism. We're just way out of balance.
And if he's drunk, if he thinks that.
Well, I think it could happen in socialism too. I'm not.
I'm sure
that's what he's advocating. It might be easier under socialism. It might be even easier under communism. It just happens that in our world and in our history, it's happening under capitalism.
But the alienation inherent in capitalism there's no way to get rid of it. And he's sort of talking about alienation, but
yes, okay. So in any society, you'll be alienated about something. Capitalism just alienates you more, and we are in a most alienated of all societies now. But love is not alienating; it's what grounds us, and we're destroying that as well. And so we're alienated even in love. And so the topic of the book is not socialism per se, but love and the threats to love. So in that sense, what he wants us to do is to lose our love alienation, our alienation in love, and find true love, and work to keep it. Don't destroy it. And in that sense, that can be done under any mode of production. It just happens that we're talking about the neoliberal one, and this one in our modern world is what's causing this. And it could be bad. The results could happen in a world, say a Soviet system that still existed today in an alternate future or an alternate dimension or something.
Well, I could agree it could happen in Soviet system because that was a degenerated worker state.
Okay, well, let's say an ideal communist system was able to be created. I mean, and you would still some of these, maybe there would be other ones as well. Some of these threats to love would still exist. And what he's saying is you got to become aware of them. And he's talking about our society because that's the one we live in.
Okay, I agree. I'll agree. I agree that might be possible in a future socialist or communist society. But I still think it's impossible under capitalism.
What, to love?
Yeah, because you're still dealing with alienation from like four different, from your labor, from your product, from your neighbor, from your community, from your species being. He outlines all the ways in which we are alienated, and these are the backbones of this is the backbone of capitalism. So um,
Mhm.
maybe you can attempt for this
So in
love,
that
but
sense,
you're always going to be defeated and pulled back um, by these estrangements.
he won't say always. He does say that it happens. That's why society doesn't like this kind of love, because it's dangerous for society. It gives you the power to change what you wouldn't have even considered in the past before you loved. And that's very dangerous to society. If you're willing to give up everything for your beloved, like he talked about the love death of like Romeo and Juliet and Kristen and Istadol, these represent a threat to society, and that's why society doesn't want that. And that would be true of any society. So the society, in a sense, is against love for its own sake. He's saying, screw society, go for love.
All right, fair.
All right. So where were we? Primal distance. Okay, we need to create a strict border between our self-love and the other, because we want to keep the other as an end in itself, not as a means to our ends. And when we do that, we protect the otherness of the other. We preserve the possibility of love. And again, it doesn't mean that we have love. It just means that if we destroy the other, we don't have love. But if we preserve the other, we at least have the possibility of love. Ends in themselves have a dignity that is beyond ownership. Ownership perverts them and destroys their otherness. That's why you can never really own your lover. You say, she's my girlfriend. You're already in the language of ownership, right? You would advise against that. I mean, it might sound cute and all that, but if you take that seriously, you've already destroyed her. So he quotes a guy named Martin Buber with regards to primal distance, serves as the very principle of being human and constitutes the transcendental condition for any alterity existing at all. So if you want an alter, I guess in both senses of the word, you need that primal distance. You need that separation between you and the other. You're not the same, and you can't even imagine that you would be the same. So primal distance is what makes, here's a new term, it's an old term, but he uses it, continence possible. Continence like the face. Many things have faces, but an other person has a continence. We call for or call up things such as sex objects, but we cannot properly address them. To address someone requires the dignity of propriety and the decency that distance affords. We call up objects. Here's a pen. I'm going to use it. We call up for a sex object. You're going to use it. That's not erotic. That's not love. So again, to address someone, to see their continence, requires that primal distance. When the continence is returned, the other becomes nearer and closer, but still other. And here's an interesting thing he's about to say. He becomes nearer and closer. We're talking about intimacy here, but we're talking about intimacy, but what is happening by all other means, by social media, that it brings us closer, is actually crowding, right? So by means of social media, we seek to bring the other as near as possible, but too close to close any distance between ourselves and him and her, we create proximity. But this does not mean that we have more of the other. Instead, we are making the other disappear in the crowd. So again, nearness is negative insofar as remoteness is inscribed. When we get closer to somebody, we may know a little bit more about them. We may have shared experience, but we don't ever know entirely. But what social media is doing, it's creating a sort of closeness that crowds it out. Like, I mean, you get a text message and it's like, you don't really want to deal with it at that moment. It's kind of crowding out the rest of your life. Or too many emails. That's what he's referring to here. You don't have that strict separation, which love requires. That's the negativity of being apart. If you've ever been apart from a loved one for any length of time, getting back together, even if it's only for a short while, is like pure bliss and pure joy because of the negativity. If you had been with them all that time, it wouldn't be the same. Yes. That's the negativity of that he's talking about here. That's that primal distance that must be maintained in order to preserve the otherness of the other and to see the difference between, like, if you always have positivity, they're always there because you can grab them any second you want. You're losing something, and social media is
Right.
not
Okay.
helpful in
Interesting.
that
So
sense.
in a really healthy relationship might have, you know, people gone and they don't get to see each other all week, but every weekend they do, and then they get to re-experience that. I don't know that
Well, even if they're living together, it just means that they do need some time apart.
to appreciate. Okay, yeah, to appreciate each other when they are together.
But those are like that's like a concrete example.
Yeah.
But the attitude should always be there. There's a strict separation between you and this other person, even when you're together, because she is not you, and she is not your image reflected back to you. She's not supposed to be your tool in the sense that I meant it earlier. So, um, nearness is negative insofar as remoteness is inscribed within it, but now a total abolition of remoteness is underway. This does not produce nearness so much as it is abolishing it. Instead of closeness, it entails crowding. And when you're crowded in, you create anxiousness, and it's not a happy place to be. So too much nearness, again, positivizing, putting in too much creates a bad, because you're getting too much of a good thing in a sense. Therefore, it is nearness is inhabited by tension. So in contrast, crowding acts positively. The power of negativity lies in the fact that things are enlivened precisely by their opposite. Mere positivity lacks any such power to animate. You just keep adding things and never subtracting things. You don't get the wide distinction between them, right? It doesn't enhance the differences. The differences are good for most cases. Lastly, the performance principle in reference to Eros refers to the positivizing of and transforming everything into a formula for enjoyment and consumption, which is what capitalism is trying to do, right? And I want such and such. This is what we're told to do. We want such and such. And we create a list of ideal candidates that our future sex partner or wife or husband should be. But it is negativity in the sense of transgression and surprise that cannot be formalized, and that's what enlivens Eros. If you've ever been attracted to somebody who's just totally different than you or completely unexpected, that's more likely to be the case, because it's difference that animates it. Right now, everybody's the same and interchangeable, but it's the differences that make up the enlivening aspect of the other, and that's why they must maintain the separation as well as the otherness of the other person. However, the present is the inferno of the same, and only an unformalized future is open to the event of the appearance of the other. Unformalized. We tend to have our lives planned out ahead of us, and it's very difficult to do spontaneity. We all talk about it as a wonderful thing, but in practice, it's very rare. That's part of what's dying off in our world. We have responsibilities at every moment of the day, and if we're an achievement subject, an entrepreneur of the self, we've imposed them upon ourselves, and therefore are cutting out the possibility for idiosyncratic spontaneity, and that's a destruction of even opportunities of love. What does he say here? Last sentence. Eros is an asymmetrical relation with the other. As an asymmetrical relation with the other, trivializes all of this planning, formalizing, performance, debt, and default. When you are in love, plans can change just like that. That is the exciting, the mystery, the wonderfulness of it. And it's lost in today. I mean, if you have a plan, this is what I'm going to be doing, it's all laid out. Love can destroy that. And that's why society doesn't like it. And that's why society fights against it at every step of the way.
Right. Love can destroy your plans. Absolutely.
Hmm.
So it's I think it's analogous to you know, backpacking through some country. If
Yeah.
you go, maybe you book your first hostel, your first couple, but then if you might find that if you've booked your entire trip and you've planned it out, then that time when you meet someone maybe you're attracted to, or you just meet an interesting group of people that are doing something else, then you've killed your ability to take life by the horns and go where it
Yeah.
takes you.
When you are in love, you cannot take life by the horns. That's an achievement subject. That's what society would like you to think that you do, as long as you take it
All
by
right, go
the
with the
horns that they
flow.
want you
Then
to do.
maybe is the right
Uh,
way to put it.
well, it depends on what the flow is. If it's society, like okay, this here he's a bit Nietzschean in a sense. So for Nietzsche, freedom is the only freedom you have is to go against the flow.
Sure.
Anybody who doesn't make a decision has their decisions made for them by the flow and they follow their life. It's only once you've decided, no, I don't want to go down this flow, that you can actually fight against the flow. And it requires a struggle. And the only free individuals are the ones who actually fight and beat that flow, which requires a struggle. And it's very difficult. Very few of us ever do it. And in fact, only supermen do it. The Ubermensch is one. Some of us struggle against it. He calls this the transformation of the spirit from 99% of the people into a camel, who takes on the flow with real vigor and actually tries to accelerate beyond the flow. Then it transforms into the lion, which says no to the flow, and he calls the flow a dragon actually. The dragon, he says no to the dragon. He fights the dragon. He must kill the dragon, and it's very difficult to do that. But when he does that, he becomes a child, reevaluating everything and creating, above all, creating. And that is where love actually is. It's in the child. And this is in our inner child. That almost sounds cliche, but it's true, because a lot of psychologists talk about our inner child and saying that that's where true intimacy comes from. That's where true play and true enjoyment of life. Our adult lives are just boring compared to child's lives, right? The seriousness of a child at play is one of the things that Nietzsche was talking about as being incredibly joyful and serious at the same time. Whereas adults, we're serious. We're not joyful when we're serious, but children can be, and that's where love. That's the domain of love, and it's being killed in our society. And that, I think, ends it for today. I think we're going to be doing two more of these.
Two more. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's right. You said it was a very dense book.
Oh yeah, we've got two chapters into it, so that would be 16 pages into a 53-page book.
All right. Well, since we've been kind of not going, on our 2 week, we haven't been following our 2 week schedule. Are you able to do this Wednesday?
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Right now it's free.
Okay. Well, then we'll shoot for that unless something changes then.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. See you
All
next
right.
time. I'm gonna end the stream.
All the best.
Good. Okay. How'd your date go, by the way? It's ended, but
Uh,